Have you noticed when you're running Theater of Pain that a lot of pugs will skip this mob, but not the previous one? Why is that? I recently started tanking this season in Mythic Plus, the second season of The War Within, after having already completed most keys at a plus 20, which means I've practiced some of the spicier pulls and closer to optimal routing before I logged into my Guardian Druid at all. I jumped into a Floodgate plus 15 the other day and realized that the ideas I had about how to select the routing in mob packs, the boss positionings, and the expectations on my healer and DPS to play the dungeon accordingly, CC correctly, select the right mob to focus target, plan mitts and healing cooldowns effectively, and avoid the nastiest parts of each pack, were wholly dependent on their level of evolution into the dungeon pool this season. So how much experience they'd had playing with different tanks, playing with different routing, and all those kinds of things, and it got me thinking. It's a simple thought process that many would say, well, so it just depends on the group and the key level. Some people know these things, some people don't know these things. You just have to feel it out. And I agree with that completely. And I think leaning more into that, it's also about at the beginning of the dungeon, if you tank, you can simply ask people if they know a certain skip or aware of how to do certain pulls. You can link the route. Most people have the Mythic Plus dungeon tool add-on. And so most people can say, oh, I don't know how to do that workshop skip. I've not heard of that. Or whatnot. And the nice thing is that most dungeons in the game don't actually require a lot of this tech to do. Most dungeons you can just kind of press W in. In fact, I, the other day, timed a plus 20 workshop just pressing W. We didn't do any shenanigans, no crazy skips, nothing. We actually ninja pulled one of the mech mobs after the first boss, and so we had to do that pull slightly differently. We did the bridge, we did the dogs. We didn't do anything really exceptional, but we timed the key. So, whereas I had been playing with another group, and for multiple attempts of this plus 20, we've been struggling to time the plus 20, even with a highly specific route, doing the bridge skip, saving time here and there. So, some keys, the point I'm getting at is a lot of keys don't actually need a lot of this tech. It's about where and when would you look to inject it. I would say as well that people in lower key levels, in theory, need simpler routing, can just press W, don't need to do anything crazy. However, people in lower key levels will have lower item level, and they probably won't know their class as well. They probably won't be as optimized, so their damage will be lower, which means that a W route might not actually be enough if their damage is lower. So, whereas, when you play at the high-end level and you're doing 18s, 19s, 20s, etc. Most people are optimally geared, they really know the dungeons and the pulls, and they plan out their cooldowns and their mitts and things accordingly, and so really a lot of people are maximizing the damage that they can do, so it comes down to having really good routing in the end. What I'm interested in is how these strategies go from the occasional tank directing the group to a certain route, to becoming a widely expected routing, right? We've all been there with certain dungeons where you reach a certain point in the season where no matter what key level you're at, this is the expected routing. How does it evolve into that point? I don't have a set answer for this. It's more of a thought experiment and something I find interesting in the development of Mythic Plus over the course of a season. But when these dungeons return and are iterated on, it crops up again. So I can go back to my earlier example with Theater of Pain, and I can talk to you guys about this, this very specific mob in Theater of Pain, where most groups are very comfortable with skipping this mob, the second mini-boss before Zav. But very few groups skip this mob, as I was talking about earlier. And I find that very interesting in the development because it's like a thought process where people are like, oh yeah, of course we're going to skip the mini-boss at the end of the wing. but nobody thinks to skip the mini-boss at the beginning of the wing. I've even had groups where I said, are we doing a double mini-boss skip at the beginning of our Theatre of Pain group? And somebody said, no, just one. And I think the group as a consensus wanted to do a double skip, so this tank just left the group. And I found that very interesting that they were totally comfortable and accepting of skipping one of these mobs, but the other one, which is skipped in the exact same way, was out of the question and actually caused this person to leave the group. So it's a very interesting development in Mythic Plus, in the progression of Mythic Plus, how people look to tackle certain packs. You can play dungeons one season and everybody will kill this one pack of mobs, and then you play the dungeon the next season, next time the dungeon comes into the pool, and suddenly, no, that pack is off limits. We do not do those mobs. We skip them. I think a great example of this is Motherload, for example, where most groups now, even on a lower key level, I think I did a plus 12 Motherload the other day, and this was the route that we did. Killing that first pack, and then skipping everything to the first boss. And it's just a really interesting development in the player base and where people get these resources from. I think some of it probably comes from streaming and content creators and YouTubers, and I think there's a lot of power there in actually establishing a general routing of dungeons and expected play. And it's just very interesting then beyond that to think about how this trickles down. I've played with friends in some lower key levels, and I actually suck as a tank because I go and try and do the MDI meta pull and everything that I'm used to doing on maybe like a plus 20, and then I go and play with my friends in a plus 10 weekly no lever, and they start getting angry at me because I pulled too many mobs, and it's like a desyncing in the communication, because in my head I'm like, well, this is the standard. This is what everybody knows what to prioritize and what to hit, and then you find out that not everybody does. Something that I definitely think about when it comes to the routing and the expectation and all that kind of stuff when in Mythic Plus is down to the success rate. And I think there is this awareness of the community that just seems to be baked in, where people know that certain skips have a way higher success rate than others. So people in dungeons are way more likely, I feel, to try something early on in a dungeon compared to late in a dungeon. If you, within the first 5 minutes of being in a dungeon, can try something, and it might work out, it might not, people are way more likely to take that chance, even if it's a lower chance of success, then deeper in the dungeon when you've already been in it for 25 minutes and then people want to do some tech with maybe the last boss. I mean, look at Workshop, for example. Workshop is a key example of this, actually, where most groups are comfortable trying to do the, waste processing unit skip and trying to do some shenanigans here in this first area because it's not too early into the dungeon. It's fairly simplistic. You haven't invested a whole lot of time. If it doesn't work out, okay, go next. No big deal. There's just one guy who's lost his key. That's fine though, right? But a lot of people seem to be up for doing this skip, this G24, G25 skip, where the tank might pull away, and then you have to either use a priest to soothe the pack so that you can run past, or invis skip, or whatever you're going to be planning on doing here. And this skip, for me, has about an 80 to 90% failure rate. So much so that me and my group, when we did this key, decided that we wanted to skip the bridge at one point. I mean, I'd ignore this route, right? But I have had a group we've tried to skip this whole sort of bridge area, this like, this wave, pack wave point, and instead just opted to kill these packs because getting this deep into a dungeon, let's say it's a 19 resilient, you get this deep into the dungeon and then you fail here. Well, it's right at the last hurdle, and it's way more mentally devastating to fail here on this last pull compared to, a lot of groups opting even not necessarily for a skip, but just for a big Hail Mary play where a lot of people will pull this group in all in one. You probably don't really need to time the key, but people are way more happy to test and trial things at the beginning of a dungeon, I find. And I think that's quite interesting. I think that dictates a lot of why we actually choose certain routing and how these things filtrate into the wider community. It comes down to what is more likely to succeed, how deep into the dungeon are we, how difficult is this to actually pull off. Some skips and things are harder than others. So for me, this is all just really fun, fascinating things to think about when it comes to dungeons. It's definitely helped improve my mindset as a tank when I've been doing just some alt keys, going into 15s, 16s and things like that, having not tanked the dungeon yet, and just thinking like, I wonder what we can get away with. I wonder what people are aware of in these dungeons. Definitely as the season goes on, people start to get, there becomes more of a standardized approach to a lot of these dungeons. People seem to be a lot more familiar and comfortable with expected like routing and pull size and priority mobs and all that kind of stuff. Something that I would definitely advertise for people that are just learning to tank or want to improve as tank is either go and watch some streamers that you respect their you respect their gameplay and whatnot, or you like them. Go check them out. Check out how they're playing these dungeons, and I wouldn't necessarily take 100% of what they're doing and go, right, I need to play like that. But look at key points where either, hey, this is a simplistic skip or a simplistic thing that I can do, a pull that I can set up very comfortably and easily, and look to recreate that potentially in your keys. Also, if you can try and implement routing and skips and whatnot that doesn't require a lot of input and effort from the rest of the group. If you have a skip that requires everybody to have an invis pot or to, do a certain jump, that kind of thing, if people mess it up, then key's over and it really sucks. So if you can do simple skips, simple routing, things where you can take a lot of the pressure. So for example, if we look at a skip that might be really bad is the bridge skip in Workshop. Not many people are very comfortable with that because it requires either a very specific setup in like the angle that you jump at, knowledge of the game and the fail points, the glitches, the bit where you get stuck in the wall or you miss and you fall down. That's quite a more complex skip that requires a lot of people going into an empty dungeon and practicing it for a couple hours. That's what me and my team did, is we had to practice this for hours and we would still have failures. So that's maybe a skip that's probably more advanced and you don't want to do for the average group. Another example for more advanced thing might be a group doing double mini boss in Priory and going and jumping up on the altar there. Not a lot of people know like how to get up there and they mess it up, and if one person fails it, it's going to get everybody cleaved by the lunge from chainmail, and then you're potentially going to wipe. So some of those skips are more difficult compared to, say, like Floodgate. Floodgate, you can just take all of the responsibility as the tank. You pull the mob, you pull it back, everybody go. You can even do a countdown timer of like 3, 2, 1, and then everybody can run. It's a bit follow the leader. You don't need an invis pot. It's actually quite easy to do the bubble skip, right? Whereas in the same dungeon, it's more difficult to, say, do the jump starter skip here because the tank has to pull away. Everybody needs to be topped up, use a defensive, know what heal they can use or what spells they can use that's not going to put them in global combat but will keep them alive. I actually failed a Floodgate 20 last night because we tried to do this skip. The tank didn't know that they had to cancel the Riptide from the Shaman, and so it put the Shaman in combat, and then it put other people in combat, and we wiped, and we depleted the key by like 20 seconds. And it's just a bit more tricky. It's a bit more finicky. So I would recommend as a tank doing that, looking at YouTube guides, looking at streamers, seeing what they're all doing, looking to implement more simplistic routing, and then beyond that, maybe even play a different role so that you can like get used to what other tanks are doing. I know I'm putting a lot of the pressure here on like what the tank does, but I do think that the tank has a lot of scope to be the one in lower key levels, especially setting the tempo, choosing the routing. A lot of the responsibility is on them, the tank. This was just like a fun sort of like thought experiment video that I was just interested in talking about. I'm very interested in your guys' opinions in the comments about like how you think all this stuff formulates and where it all comes from. But thank you very much for watching. Hopefully this has been a fun little thought experiment, and I'll see you guys in the next one.